On my first grandson's first birthday, my son told me, "Sorry, but we don't want you here." My daughter-in-law called security to have me forcibly removed. I canceled all the payments. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and comment the city you're watching from. I never imagined that the worst day of my life would happen at my grandson's first birthday party. The gift bags in my backseat were perfectly arranged, each one containing something special I'd picked out for Tyler. The biggest box held a wooden rocking horse I'd spent weeks searching for, the kind that would last generations. I wanted it to be perfect. The drive to David's house felt longer than usual that Sunday afternoon. I'd been looking forward to this day for weeks, planning every detail of my outfit, choosing the perfect card, even practicing the song I wanted to sing to Tyler. At 62, these moments with my grandson had become the brightest spots in what had become an increasingly lonely life since my husband passed 3 years ago. David and Jessica's house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac in one of those new developments where every lawn looked identical. I'd helped with the down payment 2 years ago, along with covering the closing costs when their credit fell short. The memory of signing that check for $43,000 still stung a little, not because of the money, but because of how quickly David had brushed off my contribution. "Thanks, Mom," he'd said, barely looking up from his phone. "We'll pay you back eventually." I pulled into their driveway behind 3 cars I didn't recognize. The front yard was decorated with blue and yellow balloons, and I could hear laughter coming from the backyard. My heart lifted. This was going to be wonderful. I rang the doorbell twice before David answered. He looked harried, his hair messy, still wearing the casual clothes he'd probably slept in. When he saw me, something shifted in his expression. The brief smile faded into something that looked almost like annoyance. "Mom, hey," he said, not moving aside to let me in. "You're here." "Of course I'm here," I laughed, hefting the large gift bag higher. "It's my grandson's first birthday. I wouldn't miss this for the world." David glanced over his shoulder, then back at me. "Look, Mom, about that." Before he could finish, Jessica appeared behind him. She looked stunning as always, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite having a 1-year-old, her makeup flawless. She was wearing a designer dress I recognized from her Instagram posts, the kind that cost more than I spent on groceries in 2 months. "Margaret," she said, her voice tight. "We need to talk." I felt the first flutter of unease in my stomach. "Is everything okay? Is Tyler sick?" "Tyler's fine," David said quickly. "It's just, this isn't a good time." I looked between them, confusion mounting. "What do you mean?" "We planned this weeks ago. I brought gifts. I made Tyler that photo album you wanted." Jessica stepped forward, and for the first time I noticed how cold her eyes were. "Margaret, I'm sorry, but we've decided we don't want you here today." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually took a step backward, nearly dropping the gifts. "What?" "You heard her," David said, his voice harder now. "We think it's best if you leave." I stared at my son, searching his face for any sign of the boy I'd raised, the man who used to call me every Sunday just to chat. "David, I don't understand. What did I do wrong?" Jessica crossed her arms. "It's not about one thing, Margaret. It's about your entire attitude. The way you constantly interfere, the way you criticize our parenting, the way you try to control everything." "I don't." I started, but she cut me off. "You do. And we're tired of it. We've been talking about this for months and we've decided we need space. From you." The ground felt like it was shifting beneath my feet. "But Tyler, he's my grandson. I love him. And we love him too," David said. "Which is why we're protecting him from toxic influences." Toxic influences. The words echoed in my head like a slap. I looked at the neighbors' houses, wondering if anyone was watching this humiliation unfold on their doorstep. "Please," I whispered, hating how desperate I sounded. "Just let me give him his gifts. I won't stay long." Jessica's expression hardened. "No. We've made our decision." That's when I saw the neighbors starting to emerge from their houses, drawn by the raised voices. Mrs. Chun from next door was watering her plants but clearly listening. The couple across the street had paused their afternoon walk to stare. "Mom, just go," David said, his voice carrying across the quiet Sunday afternoon. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." I stood there for a moment longer, clutching the gifts I'd spent so much time choosing. feeling the weight of all those watching eyes. Then Jessica did something that will haunt me forever. She called inside the house. "Honey, can you call someone to help escort Mrs. Hartwell off the property?" A man I didn't recognize appeared in the doorway. Later, I would learn he was Jessica's brother-in-law, some kind of security consultant. He was large, intimidating, and he looked at me like I was a threat. "Ma'am," he said, his voice professional but firm, "I'm going to need you to leave the premises now." The shame burned through me like acid. Here I was, a woman who had raised David alone after his father left, who had worked double shifts as a nurse to put him through college, who had never asked for anything in return. And now I was being treated like a criminal in front of the entire neighborhood. I set the gifts down on their doorstep with shaking hands. "These are for Tyler," I said quietly, "for when he's older. So he knows his grandmother loves him." Neither David nor Jessica acknowledged the gifts. I walked back to my car on unsteady legs, fumbling with my keys while the security consultant watched from the doorway. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse in my rearview mirror of David picking up the gifts and carrying them inside. At least Tyler would get them, I told myself. That was something. But the real blow came 3 days later when I drove past their house again. There, sitting by the curb with the garbage, was the beautiful wooden rocking horse I'd spent weeks finding for Tyler. That's when I realized this wasn't about space or boundaries or protecting Tyler from toxic influences. This was about something much deeper, much more calculated. And as I sat in my car staring at that discarded gift, I felt something inside me break, and then harden into something I'd never felt before. It was time to stop being taken advantage of. It was time to discover exactly what my generosity had been buying all these years. I spent that entire Monday night sitting at my kitchen table with my checkbook, bank statements, and a calculator that seemed to mock me with every number it displayed. The coffee had gone cold hours ago, but I couldn't stop. I needed to see it all laid out in front of me. Needed to understand exactly how much my love had cost me over the years. The first shock came when I added up the house payments. $43,000 for the down payment, but that was just the beginning. When David and Jessica's credit application was denied for the full amount they wanted, I'd quietly covered the difference by co-signing for an additional $37,000. Then there were the times when their mortgage payments were late, 6 occasions over 2 years where I transferred money to prevent them from defaulting. Each time David had promised it was temporary, just until his next commission check came in. Total so far, $87,462. I stared at that number until my eyes watered. That was more than I'd made in 2 full years of nursing before I retired. But I wasn't done. The car payments came next. Jessica had insisted she needed a reliable vehicle after Tyler was born. Something safe and dependable. The Honda CR-V she'd chosen cost $31,000. I'd paid $22,000 of that up front because their monthly budget was already stretched thin with the baby expenses. Then there was their wedding. I closed my eyes, remembering how excited I'd been when David announced his engagement. Jessica had swept into our family like a tornado, beautiful and confident and seemingly perfect for my son who had always been a little too trusting, a little too eager to please. The wedding venue alone had cost $18,000. "It's a once-in-a-lifetime event, Mom," David had said when I'd hesitated at the price. "Jessica's always dreamed of getting married at the Riverside Country Club." I'd written that check because I wanted my son to be happy. I'd covered the flowers for $4,000, the photographer for $3,000, and when Jessica's father unexpectedly couldn't contribute his promised share, I'd quietly taken care of the catering costs too. Another $12,000. The honeymoon to Italy had been my wedding gift to them. $14,000 for 2 weeks of what Jessica described on social media as the most magical time of our lives. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through her Instagram posts from that trip. Photo after photo of expensive restaurants, designer shopping trips, spa treatments. All funded by me, though she'd never once mentioned that in her glowing captions about their perfect romantic getaway. By the time I finished calculating, the number staring back at me from my notebook was $197,831. Nearly $200,000. I sat back in my chair, feeling dizzy. That was more than my entire retirement savings. That was the inheritance I'd planned to leave to David, gone before I was even dead. But the money was only part of it. The more I thought about it, the more I remembered all the other ways I'd been used over the past 3 years. There was the babysitting. Just for a few hours, Mom had become overnight stays that stretched into entire weekends. I'd rearranged my book club meetings, canceled my own social plans, turned down invitations from friends because I was always available to watch Tyler. Not because I minded spending time with my grandson. I treasured every moment with him. But because I was never asked, only told. "We need you to watch Tyler this Saturday," Jessica would say. Not, "Would you be able to help us out?" Never a request, always a statement, as if my time belonged to them. I remembered Christmas last year, when I'd spent 3 days cooking and preparing their entire family dinner, only to have Jessica critique the turkey as a little dry, and suggest I might want to try a different recipe next time. I'd hosted, cooked, cleaned, and bought all the presents under their tree, while they'd given me a candle from the drugstore. For Tyler's first Christmas, I'd bought him a complete nursery set: crib, changing table, dresser, all in the expensive wood Jessica had admired at the baby store. For $1,200 worth of furniture. When I'd arrived to help set it up, Jessica had already rearranged everything and painted the room a different color. "We decided to go with a different theme," she'd said casually, as if my input hadn't mattered at all. The more I remembered, the clearer the pattern became. I wasn't David's mother in their eyes. I was a convenient source of funding and free labor. Someone to call when they needed money, babysitting, or help with household tasks, but not someone whose opinions or feelings mattered. I thought about all the family gatherings where I'd felt like an outsider in my own son's home. Jessica would introduce me to her friends as David's mom, in a tone that somehow made it sound like an obligation rather than a relationship. I was never invited to participate in conversations, never asked for my opinion, never treated like family. During their dinner parties, I was relegated to kitchen duty, bringing out food, refilling drinks, cleaning up dishes, while Jessica played hostess and took all the credit for meals I'd often helped prepare. I was like hired help who worked for free. The worst part was how David had changed. My son, who used to call me just to share funny stories from his day, who used to ask my advice about everything from job decisions to what to wear on dates. He'd become a stranger who only contacted me when they needed something. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through our text messages from the past 6 months. Every single one was either Jessica asking me to babysit or David requesting money for something. Not one message asking how I was doing, if I needed anything, or just wanting to chat. When had I become so dispensable to my own son? I thought about the birthday party again. About how quickly David had supported Jessica's decision to banish me. He hadn't even asked for my side of the story, hadn't questioned her accusations. After everything I'd done for them, everything I'd sacrificed, he'd chosen her without hesitation. That's when it hit me like a physical blow. I'd been paying them to tolerate me. All those checks, all that money, all those favors. It had been the price of admission to my own son's life. And the moment I'd become inconvenient, the moment Jessica decided I was more trouble than I was worth, it had all been meaningless. I was 62 years old, and I'd spent the last 3 years of my life buying a relationship that had never been real in the first place. But as I sat there surrounded by the evidence of my own foolishness, something else began to emerge from the hurt and humiliation. Anger. Not the hot, explosive kind, but something colder and more determined. I reached for my laptop and logged into my online banking. There, listed in my automatic payments, were all the ways I was still supporting their lifestyle. The mortgage payment that came out of my account every month. The car insurance I paid because they'd never switched it over. The family cell phone plan that included both their numbers. My finger hovered over the cancel automatic payment button. For 3 years, I'd been the ATM that funded their dreams. But ATMs could be turned off. It was time they learned what life looked like without my generosity. It was time they learned what I was really worth. Monday morning arrived with the sharp ring of my phone at 7:45. I was in my garden, tending to the roses I'd neglected while constantly babysitting Tyler, when David's name flashed across the screen. I let it ring through to voicemail. The second call came at 8:15, then 8:30. By 9 o'clock, my phone had buzzed with 6 missed calls and 3 text messages. I finished watering my plants, made myself a proper breakfast for the first time in months, and settled into my favorite chair with my coffee before finally listening to the messages. "Mom, hey, it's me. Call me back when you get this. There's some kind of problem with the mortgage payment. The second message was less calm. Mom, seriously, I need you to call me. The bank says the payment didn't go through and they're charging us late fees. By the fourth message, I could hear the panic creeping into his voice. Mom, where are you? This is important. We need to talk about the house payment situation. I deleted each message without responding and went about my day. I had a book club meeting at 11. The first one I'd attended in 6 months because I was always watching Tyler on Mondays. It felt wonderful to sit with my friends, discussing literature and sharing stories, remembering who I was beyond being David's convenient mother. When I returned home at 3, there were 14 more missed calls. The doorbell rang at 4:30. Through the peephole I could see David pacing on my front porch, his hair disheveled, still wearing what looked like yesterday's clothes. He looked frantic. I opened the door and waited. Mom, thank God. I've been calling you all day. He pushed past me into the living room, already pulling out his phone. There's been some kind of mistake with the bank. They're saying the mortgage payment didn't go through. But I know you set up automatic payments. I closed the door slowly and turned to face him. There's no mistake, David. He looked up from his phone, confusion creasing his features. What do you mean? I canceled the automatic payments. All of them. The color drained from his face. You what? Why would you do that? I walked to my kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, taking my time. David followed, his agitation filling the small space like smoke. Mom, you can't just cancel the mortgage payments. We'll lose the house. That's not my problem anymore. Not your problem? His voice cracked. What do you mean it's not your problem? You're my mother. I turned to face him, seeing clearly for the first time in years the entitled man my generous son had become. Yes, I'm your mother. Not your personal bank. I don't understand what's happening here. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from his childhood when he was caught in a lie. Is this about Sunday? Look, maybe Jessica came on a little strong, but you have to understand her perspective. Her perspective? I set my glass down carefully. Enlighten me. She's just protective of Tyler. And honestly, Mom, you have been a little intense lately. The constant advice showing up unannounced, questioning our parenting decisions. Each word felt like a small knife. When have I questioned your parenting decisions? Come on. The organic food thing, the screen time comments always suggesting we do things differently. Jessica feels like you don't trust us to raise our own son. I stared at my son, marveling at how thoroughly Jessica had rewritten history. David, when did I ever criticize your parenting? Just last month you said Tyler should be eating more vegetables. I brought him homemade baby food because he was constipated and you asked me what to do. David's mouth opened then closed. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. And the screen time comment? You asked me why he was so fussy, and I mentioned that Dr. Peterson recommends limiting screens for babies under 2. You asked for my opinion. The uncertainty in his eyes grew, but he shook it off. Okay, maybe those specific examples aren't great, but the point is, Jessica feels overwhelmed by your involvement. My involvement? I repeated the words slowly. Is that what we're calling it when I pay your mortgage, watch your son for free, and fund your entire lifestyle? That's not fair, Mom. We never asked you to pay for everything. The lie hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud. I walked to my kitchen drawer and pulled out the folder I prepared after my calculations Sunday night. Inside were copies of every check, every bank transfer, every receipt. $43,000 for your down payment, I said, placing the first set of papers on the counter. $37,000 co-signing for the additional loan amount. $22,000 for Jessica's car. $18,000 for your wedding venue. With each amount, I placed another stack of papers on the counter. David's face grew paler. Should I continue? Because I have documentation for all $197,831 I've given you over the past 3 years. David stared at the papers as if they might burst into flames. Mom, we're grateful for everything you've done. Grateful. I laughed, a sound with no humor in it. David, when was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing? I call you all the time. To ask for money or babysitting. When was the last time you asked about my health, my friends, my life? When was the last time you invited me somewhere that didn't involve me working for free? He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. I'll save you the trouble of thinking. It's been over 2 years. My phone buzzed with a text message. Jessica. Margaret, David told me about the mortgage situation. This is incredibly selfish. You're going to make your own grandson homeless over a family disagreement. I showed David the message. This is how your wife speaks to me. The woman you chose over your mother. She's just scared, Mom. We both are. If we can't make the mortgage payment, we could lose everything. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you threw me out of my grandson's birthday party like I was a criminal. David's phone started ringing. He glanced at the screen, Jessica, and declined the call. It immediately started ringing again. Look, maybe we handled Sunday wrong, he said, his voice taking on the pleading tone I remembered from when he was a child asking for a later bedtime. But we can work this out. We're family. Are we? Because on Sunday, you made it very clear that I'm not part of your family. The phone rang again. This time David answered it, walking to the far side of my kitchen. No, she won't reinstate the payments, I heard him say in a low voice. I don't know. She's really upset about Sunday. There was a pause as Jessica spoke. I can't just demand that she give us money, Jess. She's my mother. Another pause, longer this time. No, I'm not going to threaten her. That's crazy. I couldn't hear Jessica's response, but I watched David's face change, hardening into an expression I'd never seen before. Fine, he said finally. I'll try. He hung up and turned back to me, but something had shifted. The pleading son was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. Mom, you need to understand something. Jessica's pregnant again. The words hit me like a slap. What? She's 8 weeks pregnant. We haven't told anyone yet, but the stress of this situation, it's not good for the baby. I stared at him, feeling sick. So you're trying to manipulate me with an unborn grandchild? It's not manipulation. It's reality. If we lose the house, where are we going to live with 2 kids? Jessica can't handle the stress of moving while pregnant. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to cut me out of your lives. David's face hardened further. You know what, Mom? Maybe Jessica's right about you. Maybe you are toxic. What kind of grandmother threatens to make her own grandchildren homeless? The words hung in the air like poison. I looked at this man I'd raised, this person I'd sacrificed everything for, and I realized I was looking at a stranger. Get out of my house, David. Mom. Get out. Now. He stood there for a moment longer, then gathered up the papers I'd spread across the counter. Keep these, I said. Consider them a reminder of what your family was worth to me. After he left, I sat in my quiet kitchen and realized something profound. For the first time in 3 years I felt peace. The constant anxiety about their next crisis, the endless worry about whether I was doing enough, the exhaustion of being available for every emergency. It was all gone. My phone buzzed with another text from Jessica. This isn't over, Margaret. We'll find another way. But don't expect us to forget how you abandoned us when we needed you most. I blocked both their numbers and poured myself a glass of wine. Outside my window, the sun was setting over the garden I'd finally had time to tend. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, I was sure. But tonight, for the first time in years, I was going to enjoy the silence. 3 weeks passed in blissful silence before curiosity got the better of me. I told myself I wasn't checking up on them, just protecting myself. After all, if they were struggling as much as David claimed, there might be legal implications for me as a co-signer on their loans. That's what I told myself as I drove past their house that Tuesday afternoon. What I saw made me pull over and stare. A bright red BMW convertible sat in their driveway. Not David's sensible sedan or Jessica's Honda CR-V, but a gleaming sports car that probably cost more than most people's annual salary. I recognized it immediately from Jessica's recent Instagram posts, though she'd been careful not to mention how they'd afforded it while claiming to be on the verge of losing their house. I parked across the street and opened Instagram on my phone. Jessica's feed told a very different story than the financial crisis David had described. In the past 2 weeks alone, she'd posted photos from an expensive spa day, a shopping trip to designer boutiques, and what looked like a weekend getaway to Napa Valley. The most recent post from just 2 days ago showed her getting her hair done at an upscale salon I recognized. The caption read, "Treating myself because I deserve it. Sometimes you have to invest in your happiness. Hashtag self-care, hashtag blessed, hashtag new look." The hair appointment alone would have cost at least $300. The Napa trip probably ran into the thousands, and that BMW couldn't have been cheap, even if they'd leased it. I sat in my car, pieces of a puzzle slowly clicking into place. They weren't struggling financially. They were spending money they didn't have because they'd become accustomed to me covering their basic expenses. Without my contributions, they had to choose between their lifestyle and their responsibilities, and they were choosing their lifestyle. But where was the money coming from? That evening, I called my friend Carol, whose daughter worked at the same marketing firm where Jessica had briefly been employed before Tyler was born. I'd stayed in touch with Carol over the years, and she was always willing to share a cup of coffee and catch up on neighborhood gossip. "Oh, honey," Carol said when I casually mentioned Jessica, "Amanda told me some interesting things about that girl. Did you know she was let go from the firm?" I nearly dropped my coffee cup. "What? When?" "About 8 months ago. Amanda said there were some issues with expense reports. Nothing criminal, mind you, but Jessica had been creative with her reimbursement claims. Business lunches that were actually personal shopping trips, travel expenses that didn't quite add up. The kind of thing that makes a company nervous." David never mentioned she lost her job. "I don't think he knows. Amanda said Jessica made them agree not to contact her references or discuss the circumstances of her departure. Some kind of settlement to avoid a bigger investigation." My mind raced. 8 months ago was right around the time Jessica had started insisting they needed more help with household expenses. She'd convinced David that Tyler's needs were stretching their budget thin, which is when I'd started covering more of their monthly bills. "Carol, did Amanda mention anything else?" "Well, this is just gossip, but she said Jessica had been running some kind of side business out of the office, using company resources for personal projects. Multi-level marketing, I think. Some beauty product line where she was trying to recruit other employees. Multi-level marketing." I'd seen Jessica's social media posts about entrepreneurial opportunities and financial freedom, but I'd assumed it was just motivational nonsense. What if it was more than that? I spent that evening researching Jessica's online presence more thoroughly. Her Instagram was just the surface. She had a Facebook business page for something called Radiant Beauty Solutions, where she promoted expensive skincare products and recruited business partners. The posts were full of promises about six-figure incomes and flexible schedules, all the hallmarks of a pyramid scheme. But what really caught my attention were the photos. Jessica posing with luxury cars that weren't theirs, standing in front of mansions with captions about success mindset and living your dreams. She was creating a fake lifestyle to recruit people into her downline, using props and locations to suggest a wealth that didn't exist. The next morning, I did something I'd never done before. I created a fake social media profile and reached out to some of the women who'd been commenting on Jessica's posts, asking about the business opportunity. The responses I got were heartbreaking. Woman after woman describing how they'd invested hundreds or thousands of dollars in Jessica's program, believing her promises about easy money and financial freedom. Most had made little to nothing back. Several mentioned feeling pressured to keep buying products and recruiting friends, even when it was clear the system wasn't working. One message stood out from a woman named Linda. I lost $8,000 following Jessica Hartwell's system. She promised me I'd make that back in the first month, but I never sold enough products to even cover my startup costs. When I asked for help, she told me I wasn't working hard enough and needed to invest more money in advanced training. I finally realized it was a scam when my daughter pointed out that Jessica was living in a house her mother-in-law was paying for while telling us how successful she was. My mother-in-law was paying for. The words burned in my mind. Jessica had been using my financial support as proof of her success, leveraging my generosity to scam other women. I discovered more over the following days. Jessica had been collecting monthly payments from at least 12 women in her downline, promising them mentorship and success strategies. She'd convinced several to take out credit cards or loans to invest more heavily in inventory. She'd even started offering VIP coaching sessions for an additional $500 per month. The BMW in their driveway wasn't a sign of financial success. It was a prop in Jessica's elaborate con game, probably leased with money she'd collected from her victims. But the most damning discovery came when I found a private Facebook group Jessica had created for her top performers. I'd convinced one of her former recruits to add me as a friend, and through her, I gained access to the group. The messages in that group revealed the true extent of Jessica's deception. She'd been coaching her recruits on how to fake success to attract more victims. Tips on renting luxury cars for photos, borrowing expensive accessories, even staging fake vacations using stock photos and creative captions. In one particularly revealing post, Jessica had written, "Remember, ladies, perception is reality in this business. You have to look successful to attract success. If you need to borrow or rent things for photos, do it. The investment will pay off when you start recruiting serious business partners." She'd also been encouraging her downline to target vulnerable women, recent divorcees, single mothers struggling financially, women going through difficult life transitions. She provided scripts for reaching out to these women and exploiting their desperation. The worst part was a conversation thread where Jessica bragged about her living situation. She'd told her recruits that she'd convinced her mother-in-law to cover her basic expenses so she could focus on building her business empire. She'd actually framed my financial support as a business strategy, something she'd manipulated rather than received out of love. One of her recruits had asked how to get family members to support their business ventures, and Jessica had responded with a detailed plan. Start small with emotional manipulation. Make them feel responsible for your success. Then gradually increase their investment. The key is making them think they're helping you achieve your dreams while you're actually building your empire. I sat in my car outside the library where I'd been doing this research, my hands shaking as I read Jessica's words on my phone screen. She'd been playing a long con, not just on the women she'd recruited, but on me and David too. Every crisis, every financial emergency, every request for help had been part of a calculated strategy to keep the money flowing while she built her fraudulent business. The pregnancy announcement David had used to try to manipulate me suddenly made sense too. Jessica probably needed the pressure of an expanding family to justify asking for more support, more financial assistance. Another mouth to feed, another college fund to start, another reason for generous Grandma Margaret to open her wallet. But I wasn't done investigating yet. That evening I called David's former colleague, a man named Tom who'd helped him get his current job. Tom and I had always gotten along well, and I trusted him to be honest with me. "Margaret, good to hear from you," Tom said when he answered. "How's David doing? I haven't talked to him in a while." "Actually, Tom, that's what I wanted to ask you about. How is David doing at work? He seemed stressed lately." There was a pause. "Well, I probably shouldn't say this, but David's been having some performance issues. Missing meetings, showing up late, seems distracted all the time. His supervisor mentioned it to me because they know we're friends." "Is his job in danger?" "Not immediate danger, but he's definitely not on the promotion track anymore. Word is he's been taking a lot of personal calls during work hours, dealing with some kind of family drama. It's affecting his focus." Family drama. I wondered how much of David's work problems stemmed from dealing with Jessica's business crises and the stress of maintaining their fake lifestyle. "Tom, can I ask you something confidential?" "Of course. Has David mentioned any financial problems? Or asked about salary advances or anything like that?" Another pause, longer this time. "Margaret, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but yes. He asked HR about getting an advance on his salary about 6 weeks ago. They turned him down because it's against company policy, but he seemed pretty desperate. 6 weeks ago was right around the time I'd canceled their automatic payments. David had been scrambling to cover their mortgage without my help, while Jessica continued spending money on her fake business lifestyle. I thanked Tom and hung up, my investigation complete. The picture was crystal clear now. Jessica had been running a sophisticated scam, using my financial support as proof of her success while collecting money from vulnerable women. David either didn't know about the extent of her deception or was willfully ignoring it to maintain their lifestyle. Either way, they'd made their choice. They'd chosen greed over honesty, manipulation over genuine relationships. They tried to use me as a tool in their con game, and when I'd stopped cooperating, they'd attempted to guilt and threaten me back into compliance. But I had one more card to play. One more truth to uncover that would change everything. The next morning, I made a decision that would shatter their carefully constructed world of lies. I'd been documenting Jessica's fraudulent business practices for 2 weeks when the phone call came that changed everything. It was Linda, the woman who'd lost $8,000 in Jessica's scheme. She'd been helping me gather evidence, and her voice was shaking with excitement. "Margaret, you need to see this. Jessica just posted something on her private coaching group that's going to blow your mind." I was at my kitchen table, having just finished a peaceful breakfast without the constant anxiety of waiting for the next financial crisis call. What did she post? Screenshots. She's bragging about how she manipulated you and David. She's actually teaching other people how to do the same thing to their families. My blood ran cold. Send me everything. Within minutes, my phone was buzzing with images that made my stomach turn. Jessica had created what she called a masterclass for her top recruits on family financial leverage. The post was titled, "How I Turned My Mother-in-Law into My Personal ATM," and included step-by-step instructions that read like a predator's handbook. Step 1 was establishing dependency. Jessica described how she gradually convinced David that they needed my help with larger and larger expenses, starting with small emergencies and building up to major financial commitments. She coached him on using emotional language about family obligations and making me feel like refusing would mean I didn't love my son. Step 2 was isolation and control. She detailed how she'd systematically cut me off from having any real relationship with David by positioning herself as the expert on everything from parenting to finances. She trained him to see my opinions as interference and my presence as stress-inducing. But step 3 was the most chilling. Eliminating competition. Jessica had written an entire section about how to remove family members who might influence your spouse's financial decisions. She'd included screenshots of our text conversations, making fun of my attempts to maintain a relationship with Tyler, and mocking my desperate grandmother act. The worst part was a voice message she'd recorded for her recruits. The key is making them think they're choosing to help you, while you're actually training them to be your personal bank. Margaret Hartwell handed over nearly $200,000 over 3 years because I made her think it was her idea. She was so desperate to be a good grandmother that she never questioned why we always needed more money. I had to put the phone down and walk away. The casual cruelty in her voice, the way she laughed while describing my desperation, the clinical way she dissected my love for my family and turned it into a business strategy. I felt violated in a way I'd never experienced before. But there was more. Linda had been saving screenshots for weeks, and as I scrolled through them, I discovered the full extent of Jessica's deception. She'd been using photos of Tyler as emotional leverage in her recruiting, telling potential victims about the sacrifices she was making for her family while building her business empire. She'd even staged photos of herself working from home while Tyler played nearby, creating a false narrative about being a dedicated mother and entrepreneur. The red BMW I'd seen in their driveway wasn't leased with money from her downline. It was a rental she'd been using for promotional photos and then returning. The spa days and shopping trips were being financed by credit cards she'd opened using fake income statements from her business. The Napa Valley weekend had been paid for with money she'd borrowed from one of her recruits under the guise of a business investment opportunity. She was drowning in debt while maintaining a facade of success, and she'd been planning to solve her financial problems by escalating her manipulation of me. According to her posts, the pregnancy announcement had been carefully timed to coincide with cutting me off from Tyler, creating maximum emotional pressure to restart my financial support. But the most damaging revelation was yet to come. As I scrolled through more of Jessica's messages, I found a conversation thread where she'd been advising another woman on how to handle a difficult mother-in-law who was questioning her business practices. "Sometimes you have to be willing to burn bridges," Jessica had written. "If they won't stay in line, you make them the villain. Document everything they do that could be seen as inappropriate or intrusive. Build a case that they're unstable or harmful to your family. Then you can justify cutting them off completely while looking like the reasonable one." She'd included photos and screenshots as examples of her documentation strategy. Pictures of me arriving at their house unannounced. Except the timestamp showed I'd been invited. Text messages where I'd offered unsolicited advice. Except she'd edited out her own messages asking for my opinion. Even the incident at Tyler's birthday party had been planned, with Jessica coaching her brother-in-law on how to make me look aggressive and unhinged. The woman Jessica was advising responded with enthusiasm. "This is brilliant. I'm definitely going to try the documentation approach. My husband's mother has been asking too many questions about our finances lately, and I need her to back off without losing access to her money." I realized I wasn't Jessica's first victim, just her most successful one. She'd been refining her manipulation techniques through practice on other families, other relationships, other women who'd loved their sons enough to be exploited. The final piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. Jessica had been sloppy in one of her coaching sessions, accidentally including screenshots of her bank statements while bragging about her monthly income from her recruits. The statement showed deposits from 12 different women, ranging from $300 to $1,500 per month. She was collecting nearly $11,000 monthly from her victims, while telling them she was teaching them to build their own successful businesses. But those same bank statements also showed something else. She'd been systematically emptying her business account to fund her lifestyle, leaving nothing for the women who'd trusted her with their investments. The money they'd paid for inventory, training materials, and mentorship was being spent on Jessica's rent cars, designer clothes, and spa treatments. I'd seen enough. I spent the next day gathering everything into a comprehensive file: screenshots, recorded messages, bank statement images, testimonials from her victims. The evidence painted a picture of a woman who turned manipulation into an art form, targeting both strangers and family members with equal ruthlessness. But before I decided what to do with this information, I needed to know one more thing. How much did David really know? That evening, I did something I'd never done before. I drove to David's office and waited in the parking lot for him to leave work. When he emerged at 6:15, looking exhausted and older than his 35 years, I followed him. Instead of driving home, David went to a bar downtown. I watched through the window as he sat alone at the counter, nursing a beer and staring at his phone with an expression of pure misery. After an hour, he was joined by Tom, his former colleague who told me about his work problems. I couldn't hear their conversation, but David's body language told the story. Slumped shoulders, hands running through his hair, the occasional gesture of frustration. At one point, I saw him show Tom something on his phone, and Tom's reaction was immediate shock followed by what looked like anger. They talked for another hour before David left, driving not toward home but to a coffee shop where he sat alone for another 40 minutes, clearly avoiding going back to Jessica. The next morning, Tom called me. "Margaret, I hope you don't mind, but David talked to me last night about some problems at home. I think there are things you should know." "What kind of things?" "He's been finding out about Jessica's business activities. Apparently, some women have been calling the house asking for refunds, and when David looked into it, he discovered she's been taking money from people without delivering what she promised." My heart started racing. How much does he know? More than Jessica realizes. He found credit cards she'd opened without telling him, discovered she'd been lying about losing her job, found out about the car rental scheme. He's been trying to figure out how to handle it without destroying Tyler's stability. Is he planning to confront her? I think he's scared, Margaret. He knows she's been lying to him, but he's also terrified of being a single father with no financial resources. She's convinced him that you hate him now, and would never help him if he left her. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. David wasn't an active participant in Jessica's schemes. He was another one of her victims. She'd isolated him from me, convinced him he was financially dependent on her success, and trapped him in a web of lies that he was only just beginning to unravel. But unlike me, David didn't have the luxury of simply walking away. He had Tyler to think about, a career that was already suffering, and probably no idea how deep Jessica's deceptions really went. It was time to make a choice. I could use the evidence I'd gathered to expose Jessica publicly, destroy her fraudulent business, and potentially send her to prison for fraud. The women she'd scammed deserved justice, and David deserved to know the full truth about the woman he'd married. Or I could use this information more strategically, as leverage to protect my son and grandson while ensuring Jessica could never manipulate our family again. Either way, Jessica's reign of manipulation was about to end, but the method I chose would determine whether David and Tyler were collateral damage or survivors of her destruction. I had all the ammunition I needed. Now I just had to decide how to fire the shot that would bring down Jessica's house of lies without destroying my family in the process. I chose Tuesday morning at exactly 9 o'clock to end Jessica's world. The choice of timing wasn't random. I knew from her social media patterns that she hosted her weekly Success Mindset coaching call every Tuesday at 9:30. Her entire downline would be listening as she delivered another session on manifesting wealth and leveraging family relationships for financial gain. I prepared everything the night before. USB drives containing all the evidence I'd gathered, organized into folders labeled with each victim's name and the amount they'd lost. Screenshots of Jessica's coaching materials where she bragged about manipulating me. Bank statements showing how she'd spent her recruits' money on luxury items while promising them business success. But I didn't drive to Jessica's house. Instead, I went to David's office. I walked into the reception area at 8:45, telling the receptionist I needed to speak with my son about a family emergency. She called David, and within minutes, he appeared in the lobby looking haggard and worried. "Mom? What's wrong? Is something wrong with Tyler? We need to talk privately. Is there somewhere we can go?" David led me to a small conference room, closing the door behind us. He looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past month. Dark circles under his eyes, his clothes wrinkled, his usual confident demeanor replaced by nervous exhaustion. "David, I know about Jessica's business." The color drained from his face. "What do you mean?" I placed one of the USB drives on the table between us. "I mean, I know about the women she's been scamming. I know about the fake income statements, the rental cars, the credit cards she opened without telling you. I know about her coaching other people to manipulate their families the same way she manipulated us." David stared at the USB drive like it might explode. "How do you know all that?" "Because I've been investigating her for 3 weeks. And because some of her victims reached out to me after they figured out she was using my financial support as proof of her success." "Mom, I can explain." "You don't need to explain anything, David. I know you're a victim too." His mouth fell open. "What?" "I know she isolated you from me gradually. I know she convinced you that my opinions were interference and my presence was stressful. I know she's been training you to see me as the problem while she drained both of us dry." David's hands started shaking. "I've been trying to figure out what to do. I found some of the credit card statements last week, and when I confronted her, she said it was all for business investments that would pay off soon. But then women started calling the house asking for refunds." "How many women?" "At least 6 that I know of. Jessica told me they were just complaining because they didn't work hard enough. But one of them was crying on the phone, saying she'd lost her kid's college fund." I watched my son's face crumble as he spoke, seeing the guilt and confusion and fear that Jessica had been using to control him. "David, there are at least 12 women total. Jessica has collected over $100,000 from them in the past 8 months. The evidence is all on this drive." $100,000? David's voice was barely a whisper. "Where did all that money go? The BMW payments, the designer clothes, the spa treatments, the fake business trips. She's been using their money to fund the lifestyle she posts on social media to attract more victims." David put his head in his hands. "I should have known. I should have questioned it when she always had money for expensive things but we couldn't afford groceries. She's a professional manipulator, David. This isn't your fault. But I chose her over you. I threw you out of Tyler's birthday party. I let her convince me that you were the problem." The pain in his voice broke my heart, but I couldn't let emotion derail what I needed to do next. "David, I need you to listen to me very carefully. In about 15 minutes, Jessica is going to receive some phone calls that will end her business and possibly send her to prison. You have a choice to make right now about whether you want to be associated with what she's done, or whether you want to protect yourself and Tyler." "What kind of phone calls?" I pulled out my phone and showed him a message I'd prepared but not yet sent. It was addressed to Jessica's entire mailing list. All the women she'd recruited, all the potential victims she'd been cultivating, everyone who followed her business pages. The message contained a link to a website I'd created overnight, titled The Truth About Jessica Hartwell. The site included every piece of evidence I'd gathered, organized in a clear timeline that showed how she'd built her fraudulent empire on the backs of trusting women and family members. "David, when I send this message, Jessica's business will collapse within hours. Her victims will demand refunds she can't provide. Some of them will probably file fraud charges. The credit card she's been hiding from you will become your responsibility if you stay married to her. Mom, I'm not finished. I've also prepared a package for the FBI's fraud division. Jessica's been operating across state lines, which makes this a federal crime. If you're still legally tied to her when this comes out, you could be considered an accomplice. David's face went white. Are you saying I could go to prison? I'm saying you need to make a decision right now about where your loyalty lies. With the woman who's been using you as a pawn in her criminal enterprise, or with your son who needs at least one parent who isn't facing fraud charges. But Tyler, I can't just abandon my family. Jessica isn't your family, David. Tyler is your family. I'm your family. Jessica is a criminal who's been using both of us. I placed a second USB drive on the table. This one contains evidence of how she's been coaching other women to manipulate their own families, including specific instructions on how she isolated you from me and turned you against your own mother. David picked up the drive with trembling hands. She really did all this on purpose? Every crisis, every emergency, every request for help was part of a calculated strategy to keep the money flowing while she built her fraudulent business. The pregnancy announcement, the threats about losing the house, even throwing me out of Tyler's birthday party. It was all designed to maintain control. My son sat in silence for a long moment, staring at the evidence of his wife's betrayal. When he finally looked up, his eyes were filled with a determination I hadn't seen in years. What do you need me to do? First, you need to call a divorce attorney. Today. Before Jessica realizes what's happening, you need to file for emergency custody of Tyler, based on her criminal activity. Okay, what else? You need to close any joint accounts you have with her immediately. Move your paycheck to a new account that she doesn't have access to. Document everything in your house that she bought with money stolen from her victims. And then, I checked my watch. It was 9:25. Then you need to be somewhere else when her world comes crashing down. Because in 5 minutes, I'm sending this message to everyone she's ever contacted. David stood up, pocketing both USB drives. Mom, I'm sorry. For everything. For choosing her over you. For letting her turn me against you. For not seeing what she was doing. David, we'll have time to rebuild our relationship later. Right now, you need to go protect your son. He nodded and headed for the door, then turned back. Mom? What you're doing? It's going to help all those women she scammed, isn't it? That's the idea. Good. They deserve justice. After David left, I sat alone in the conference room and sent the message. Within minutes, my phone was buzzing with responses. Shock, anger, gratitude from the women who'd been victimized. Several immediately forwarded the information to local authorities. By noon, Jessica's social media accounts had been suspended. By 2 o'clock, local news stations were running stories about the Instagram scammer who defrauded dozens of women. By evening, the FBI had issued a statement about investigating interstate fraud charges. I drove past David and Jessica's house that afternoon. There were 2 police cars in the driveway and a news van parked across the street. Through the windows, I could see people moving around inside, probably serving search warrants and seizing evidence. David called me that evening from his lawyer's office. It's done, Mom. I filed for divorce and emergency custody. Jessica's been arrested. Her lawyer says she's probably going to prison for several years. How's Tyler? Confused but okay. He's asking for you, actually. Keeps saying Grandma, and looking around like he's searching for someone. The words hit me harder than I'd expected. Can I see him? Mom, I was hoping you'd ask. We're staying at a hotel until I can find an apartment, and Tyler needs all the stability he can get right now. Would you consider? I mean, if you're willing to help me figure out how to be a single parent, I could really use my mother right now. 3 months later, I was sitting in Tyler's new bedroom, reading him a bedtime story while David finished the dishes in the kitchen of their small, but comfortable apartment. The wooden rocking horse I'd originally bought for Tyler's first birthday sat in the corner. David had rescued it from the garbage and refinished it himself as an apology gift. Jessica had been sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for wire fraud and conspiracy. The civil lawsuits from her victims had stripped away everything she'd accumulated through her schemes. The red BMW had been repossessed, the designer clothes sold to pay restitution, the fake lifestyle completely dismantled. David had gotten a promotion at work after his supervisor learned about the stress he'd been under due to his wife's criminal activity. His performance had improved dramatically once he was no longer dealing with constant crises and emotional manipulation. Most importantly, our relationship was slowly healing. David was in therapy to process how thoroughly he'd been manipulated, and I was learning to set healthy boundaries instead of just throwing money at problems. We had weekly dinners where Tyler could play with his grandmother while David and I talked like the adults we'd always been capable of being. I wasn't the same woman who'd been humiliated at a birthday party 6 months ago. I discovered strength I didn't know I possessed, learned to value myself enough to demand respect, and found peace in a life where my love wasn't measured by my financial contributions. The best part was watching Tyler grow up in a home where manipulation and crisis weren't the norm. David was becoming the father I'd always known he could be, making decisions based on what was best for his son rather than what would keep an unstable woman happy. Sometimes at night, I looked at photos from Tyler's first birthday party. The day that had seemed like the end of everything but had actually been the beginning of something much better. I'd learned that being rejected by people who don't value you isn't a loss. It's a liberation. And sometimes liberation comes disguised as the worst day of your life.